Anticipatory action without an early warning is like the human body without its senses. How could you sense the pending danger that is going to affect you? Your eyes cannot see, your nose cannot breathe, your body can feel. So it's very important.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. Today's episode is produced in partnership with the CGIAR Research Initiative on Fragility, Conflict, and Migration for a new series that examines what works to improve the well-being of people in fragile and conflict-affected settings. CGIAR is a global partnership that unites international organizations engaged in research about food security. We are calling this series From Fragility to Stability. And in today's episode, I host a roundtable discussion with three experts on the topic of anticipatory action. That is, how acting before a crisis hits can reduce impacts on the most vulnerable. You will hear from Catalina Jaime, Head of Climate and Conflict with the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center in Colombia, Dr. Emmanuel Atto, researcher in climate adaptation with the International Water Management Institute in Sri Lanka, and Esra El-Ghadi, project officer for Resurgence. To learn more about our series and to access other episodes in this series, please visit globaldispatches.org and click on the From Fragility to Stability tab. Thank you, and now here's the episode. Thank you all for joining me today. Let's just go down the list, have each of you introduce yourselves so people can put a voice to a name when I'll ask you questions. Catalina, why don't you begin?
It's so lovely to be here. My name is Catalina Jaime. I'm the head of the Climate and Conflict team at the Red Cross and Red Crescent Climate Center, and I'm based in Colombia.
Dr. Emmanuel Atto, go ahead.
My name is Emmanuel Atto, and I'm a climate adaptation specialist working with International Water Management Institute, and I'm based in the headquarters in Sri Lanka, Colombo.
And Esra.
I'm Esra El-Ghadi. I'm a project officer at Resurgence. I work in the Raja program, which is an anticipatory action program in East Africa. And I'm in charge of the implementation in Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, and the current implementation of Sudan Emergency Weather Service.
Catalina, I am going to start with you. So to kick off this conversation, could you explain what anticipatory action is and why it's particularly crucial in fragile and conflict-affected settings?
Anticipatory action is really a radical change in the way how do we do humanitarian action. So it really emerged from that need of being able to be ahead of disasters, of being able to use forecast information, risk analysis, to be better at planning in advance and to set up the financing mechanisms that allowed us to actually be ahead of disasters. So the whole objective of anticipatory actions is to be able to reduce risk as much as we can and to be able to respond much better to crisis. It is a core element of disaster risk reduction at the end, but particularly when we talk about fragile and conflict and violence affected settings, it becomes quite important because we are talking about populations of places that have really high levels of vulnerability, that we know that with any a small type of hazard, we will have big impacts. So being able to anticipate crisis in those particular contexts is extremely relevant. At the same time, why is it so particular? Is because it's quite difficult. It's not that easy to do it.
How does the proactive approach to anticipatory action, that is, acting on early warnings, as you described, differ from more traditional disaster response methods? And what are some of the key benefits of this shift, in particular for vulnerable communities?
So I think something that is very important for us to understand is that anticipatory action per se is not like a new thing. Like, we have been doing early warning systems for years and years and years. And early warning systems are part of the entire disaster risk management continuum. I think the added value that this approach brings is that we are kind of taking early warning systems to a next level, because we are actually having the financing mechanisms that we didn't have before to be able actually to do early action. We are having more robust decision-making processes to be able to take a decision and say, like, yes, we're going to trigger these in this moment because X, Y, Z can happen. This differs from our traditional response setting, because response is that the emergency happened and then you respond. So the disaster already, the impacts are already there. What we are doing with anticipatory action is to be ahead, because then we know, okay, what is likely to happen if we have XYZ hazards and XYZ risk, so that we are ahead of the game. We're like, okay, we are acting to be able to reduce those risks before. But the two things go hand by hand. So you do anticipatory action because you reduce those risks in the given moment of time, but then you also prepare better for a response.
So finally, for you, Catalina, given the complex nature of conflicts in fragile and conflict-affected settings, what are some of the most significant challenges that the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center has encountered in implementing anticipatory action, and how are these obstacles addressed to ensure timely and effective interventions?
So the organizations that are part of the Red Cross that are doing the implementation in the ground are our national societies. So Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies are the ones who are there at the forefront implementing the different type of interventions. The Climate Center, we are the technical support. We're kind of like the methodologically sounding board behind of this. So what we have seen from our position of supporting all these many national societies in terms of the challenges, so we have a big variety. Like, one element of it is that lack of really integrating an understanding of conflict within the design of the anticipatory action systems. So when we have done these anticipatory action systems, let's say in peace times or in normal context, so then you have a way of doing it. The challenge that we had over the years is that if we're doing this in particular contexts that have, high levels of violence, or we have high intensity conflict or different, is that there is no integration of conflict within that. Like, what would happen if, we have XYZ different situations? So I think that's one core element that we need to really to start to think more about. From one side, like context analysis, how these systems that we're setting up could fail if we have suddenly, let's say, a situation like what happened in Sudan or another different context. So that's one key element, but also the element of conflict sensitivity that is also needed within the system. So there is a lack of really integrating that element. So that's from one side. There are many other operative elements, like just one very straightforward that we face not only on anticipatory action, but on response or long-term DRR, is security concerns. Like everything related to access and to being able to deal with non-state armed groups and really being able to reach particular areas is a very big constraint. And maybe one last one that is also very important is that the traditional anticipatory action systems tend to look at a particular hazard and to be able to take a decision based on that hazard analysis and risk analysis on a given moment of time. But we're not really having a dynamic monitoring of risk. And I think that is really needed in these very complex settings, because it's not about the flood that is going to arrive, but it's about the flood maybe happening in parallel to a coup d'etat, in parallel to high intensity violence, but these elements that connect to each other. So we don't have really yet very kind of robust decision-making processes that really integrate this element of multi-risk. But we're working on it. There's a lot of fascinating work that is advancing on trying to be better at this process.
So we are going to turn back to you towards the end. For now, Emmanuel, I wanted to turn to you. How does the International Water Management Institute's work on climate adaptation and water management support the broader goals of anticipatory action in fragile and conflict-affected settings?
So IMI is a research for development organization. And so what we do is to try to conduct cutting edge research that can be translated to tangible innovations to address challenges in general related to water. And at the same time, which water is also cross systems, so supporting different systems. But when it comes to climate change adaptation and also water management in relation to anticipatory action, we have conducted several research, but one of the things that we do is try to come out with innovations. Innovations is by exploring digital platforms that will accelerate the spread of information in a timely manner so that communities can take decisions ahead of time. So apart from this, we try to also influence the anticipatory action protocols on what kind of activities that people need to take ahead of time, depending on the kind of hazard, but the hazard in terms of flood or drought that has been forecasted in a pending season. So these are some of the things that we do in relation to anticipatory action when it comes to IMI. And we also go further by trying to also influence the institutional structures by developing frameworks that can help internal coordination of various institutions to be able to mobilize not only themselves but also resources to take steps with respect to anticipatory action.
I was hoping you could share some examples of how the International Water Management Institute has successfully integrated early warning systems into water management strategies to mitigate the impacts of crises in fragile and conflict affected settings, particularly in relation to climate resilience.
So when it comes to water, the key problems with respect to climate is the fact that there can be too much of it, which is flood, or too little of it, which is drought, and to some extent also too dirty, which is maybe the water quality issues. But when it comes to AA, we are focused on trying to help communities in water scarce areas. So we are looking at drought and flood. So one of the key things that we have done is, first of all, we have developed, for example, a drought monitoring system for Zambia. And this drought monitoring system actually is developed as a result of multiple data sets combined from satellite data, from model data, from participatory kind of data set to be able to predict the dependent season, the level of or the severity of the droughts that the season is likely to face. Now, apart from that, we have also developed dashboard for multiple countries, and this dashboard is what we call, for example, AWARE, Early Warning and Early Action and Early Finance Dashboard. And the essence of this dashboard is to facilitate the development of climate information, provide it on a timely manner, and also help these communities take actionable decisions ahead of the event. And not necessarily that, but to go a step further in mobilizing resources. So Aware is a typical example of some of these innovations that we have introduced from the camp of IMI. And this platform is serving multiple countries from Sri Lanka to Senegal to Zambia to many countries. And we are looking forward to upscaling into different areas as well.
What innovative approaches has the International Water Management Institute developed to overcome challenges such as limited resources or political barriers in implementing anticipatory action?
So one of the key things that we do, Mark, is that we try to make sure that innovations are locally and context specific. So when you actually develop local or context specific innovation, you would have to involve the people in the community, and we involve government levels. Individuals have different skills and levels. And when it happens that way, you're able to identify in the process some of the challenges, and then you try to navigate through them. Now, when it comes to some of the actions that we take, so we take locally led solutions and also use of low cost interventions or technology. Because when it comes to areas where we all know that in a system where the structures are very well organized, it's even difficult to develop early warning systems. And how much more conflict prone areas where the infrastructure is a challenge, where even mobilizing people can be difficult. There are no technical expertise in these institutions like the meteorological agencies. So there's something we call carry your own technology or your own infrastructure. You have to make sure to develop such systems. We try to think about what kind of low cost technology that we have to use. And again, we also try to navigate certain technical barriers by training people locally to be able to use these tools. And indeed, to mobilize funding, IMI try to partner government, international organizations, a lot of donor, the bilateral kind of deals that fund some of our activities. And we give some local grants also to support locally led actions that will be useful in terms of the anticipatory action. So these are some of the things that we do to be able to navigate that. But central to this is co-production. We work with the people and for the people. With this, you'll be able to identify the key challenges and then navigate around those challenges.
So, Isra, meteorological data is crucial for anticipating climate-related crises. How can national meteorological and disaster management agencies enhance their collaboration with humanitarian organizations and communities to improve the accuracy and timeliness of early warnings?
From our experience with vulnerable communities in East Africa, first thing, the Met agencies and DRM agencies, they need to redefine the context that they are functioning in because of the conflict and the fragility status. So because that status, it brings new dimensions to the challenges faced by all of them. Also, it imposes and amplifies the challenges that the communities are facing. The first thing to do, and this came from an actual experience that we had from Sudan, is to build partnerships. Building partnerships is the cornerstone for collaboration between humanitarian actors and communities and med agencies. So it becomes further the skeleton of the tailored system that will achieve this the use of anticipatory action for these communities. Also, engaging the communities from the beginning in every step, it will enhance the use of anticipatory action and it strengthen and empower the communities in the face of disasters. So, engaging them in co-production of the weather and climate information and make it sure it's relevant to their context and fit their needs, it helps a lot to achieve that and stresses the role of humanitarian actors to play a great role in facilitating this with the community. Also, working together, working jointly in the co-production. By this, I mean the humanitarian actors, the Met agency, and the communities in identifying the channels and creating scenarios. They can create a platform that integrates all the early warnings, weather and climate information, and disaster risk response tools. And all of this platform can become handy to those communities who are in this context and help them with this complex situation.
What best practices have you observed in translating complex meteorological data into actionable information for local communities? And how do these practices contribute to more effective disaster risk reduction through anticipatory action?
The best practice that we came up is like with a lot of experimenting and working together with the communities through our community partners. We have our program which is called Daraja. Daraja means a bridge in Swahili, and also it is for developing anticipatory risk awareness through joint action. So Daraja is based on mapping all the stakeholders who play great role in transferring the weather early warnings to the communities and also addresses what the needs of the communities in terms of access to this information and the use of this information and their preferred channels, also in considering the alternative channels. So the Raja works closely with the community, so the community is engaged all the time in the different phases of the Raja, and it takes their input in adapting the services to their realities, and also they are engaged in the co-design of the weather and climate information provided by the Met agencies, and making sure it is accessible and actionable for those who are the most affected by extreme weather events. Also, improving the feedback loops. We are not only working with the communities, we are working for them, and we are taking back from them to make sure that there is a continuous loop of feedback that ensures the improvement of the service that they are bringing. Also, using different interventions, it depends on the different context. For example, in Nairobi, we have the weather mechanics who are community leaders who participate in translating the weather information, raise awareness campaigns, they participate in radio shows. They are the hub that transfer this information to their local communities. We have the schools program in Dar es Salaam, leveraging that students who can take the news and the information from the school to their families to alert them about the weather. We have the climate champion in Kampala who are also community messengers who lead the awareness and the anticipatory action within their settlements to be prepared for any kind of weather and climate hazards. So as we experiment, and we have the larger program across East Africa, you can find it online, and we have a lot of videos highlighting the different regions and the different interventions that we have used.
I wanted to open up now for one final round to give everyone the opportunity to respond to something that they might have heard and offer their own concluding thoughts. So, Catalina, we'll start with you.
What I wanted to raise in terms of key elements of like what do we need for a future in which we can actually be able to have anticipatory action, effective early warning, early action in FCB context. So to my mind come a couple of things that is important. One element is research. So we know that we need to advance much better research. My latest paper just shows so clearly that there is a massive gap on understanding risk, on hazard analysis, and particularly on the social science aspects of anticipatory action. My paper demonstrated that the research is concentrated in just some particular countries, but if we look at places like Libya, Yemen, Syria, so on and so forth, there's just very, very little. So I think that's one element that we really need to work on quite a lot. I think we're tackling a little bit of that, how the gaps with the partnership that we have with EMI, and I'm just very excited that we're working with EMI because we decided to work particularly on how can we learn from the past much better. How can we really understand very deeply what had happened in the past in different disaster events to really be able to create the systems that will address that. So we will have some two really amazing projects coming up with EMI, one for Pakistan and the other for Zambia, that I think is going to be really great. Maybe that one last thing related to kind of policy and like action. So I think there is a key momentum at this moment. It's like, so last year, probably you heard about, there was a declaration at COP28. It was really focused on advancing climate action in fragile and conflict affected context. And that has an element of anticipatory action of it, very, very big. So we have a really important momentum to really continue pushing donors, really to continue pushing, the whole system to be able to make this happen. And maybe one last thing that is quite exciting is that with EMI, we're creating a toolkit on anticipatory action in FCB context because we saw the need of really having something concrete that will help organizations to kind of like design the systems in a different way. So this is going to come out at the end of the year. It's going to be really exciting, and we're going to launch it at the Anticipation Hub Global Dialogue platform, in which we will be sharing this with basically the entire community that is working on anticipatory action. So I think that's quite exciting kind of steps moving forward.
We'll look forward to that. Thank you, Catalina. Emmanuel, any concluding thoughts or responses to folks?
I mean, it is very insightful to hear from Ezra and also Catalina. especially Catalina, on these knowledge gaps you identify. And of course, these conflict settings or countries with the conflict affected situations are really, really lacking in the literature, especially on the gaps that exist there. And recently there was a MENA dialogue, a platform dialogue that discussed a lot on anticipatory action, and you could see the challenges, the capacities that need to be built. And of course, there are a lot of work happening in those conflict areas. But I will want to complete my presentation or my submission this evening by trying to reiterate the points that early warning is very, very important. I always say that anticipatory action without an early warning is like the human body without its senses. How could you sense the pending danger that is going to affect you? Your eyes cannot see, your nose cannot breathe, your body can feel. So it's very important. And it is estimated to have saved almost 35 billion per year if we develop a good early warning system. That is how much losses we can actually save. So, and this, though it is very important, a lot of people still lack access. And it's this time for all of us to try to put our hands on the deck, researchers, humanitarians, to try to push the agenda of developing robust early warning systems. Because this particular lack of access is even worse when it comes to fragile countries. So, for example, the top 25 climate vulnerable countries in the world, 19 of them are from fragile and conflict affected areas. So, this is how daring the problem is. And it is time, like you and General Secretary have also called for early warning for all. So, I want to conclude by saying that the problem is here, and there are a lot of work done on early warning in countries that are not having conflict. So it's time for us to shift our attention to help those who are really living in fragile situation as well. Thank you much
Esra, over to you.
for the time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Last year, I have been in the middle of living the situation where we've lost a lot of funds because of the conflict, and we couldn't implement because the funders were reluctant to look at the situation of the communities that we are focusing on. And when the conflict happened, it just made things complicated, and nobody wants to take a step forward. So we are happy that this is coming into the surface. Also, one last thing, following Catalina's point about the social aspect of anticipatory action, I think we need to look more into this aspect, and also the indigenous and traditional knowledge that the communities has, because it is their points of strength. We need to change this mindset and empower them by using their own resources, which could be basically the knowledge that they have, because in a conflict situation, nobody can reach them to provide aid and to provide support.
Thank you, everyone. And I appreciate your time. This was great.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
likewise.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.